Hi, folks. I'd like to welcome you back to the 12th Annual Canadian Water Summit and Window on Ottawa event. This session is put on through the CWWA Emergency Management and Security Committee. I happen to chair that committee. My name is Ian McIlwham. And today we have two great speakers from Public Safety Canada. We got Robert Pitcher and we also have Carl Massé. They both have a good content and it's current events related to some cyber events that have happened in the water industry and also some additional other information. So we're going to get right to it. So for those of you who'd like to know a little bit more about Robert, please go to your WOVE app and look up his bio information. And for Carl at the start of his presentation in the second half, will give you a very quick bio on himself. So I'm going to turn things over to Robert. Robert is with Public Safety Canada, and he has done a lot of presentations and is very, Public Safety Canada themselves has been very good partners with CWWA and the Water Network. Thank you, Robert.
No sweat. Thanks for the intro, Ian. Always happy to talk to the water sector. The water sector is certainly a special focus group for the Public Safety Canada. Very happy to be here today. We're going to divide this session up between myself and my good friend Carl Massé from Public Safety Canada. He's going to take us through a case study at the beginning, and I'm going to bring you through a whole hockey sock full of different events that we're going to cover a lot of different areas. So, Carl, I'm going to throw it over to you, and then I'll take up my side again when you're done.
Fantastic. Thank you, Rob. I'll just share my screen here. One moment. There we go.
And one thing, folks, is just if you do have questions throughout the presentations, you can use the WOVE app to enter those questions, and then we'll moderate those in and hopefully get some answers from the gentleman presenting. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here at the Canadian Water Summit. So my name is Carl Massé. I'm the manager for the Regional Resilience Assessment Program here at Public Safety Canada. I work with the Critical Infrastructure Directorate. We're a program that conducts all hazards assessments of critical infrastructure throughout Canada, so in all sectors, in water included. I've done about 300 to date, and I've been working in that program since 2014. So I've been in a lot of places in Canada, and I've likely been in some of your water and wastewater treatment facilities doing assessments. So it's a pleasure to be here. So today we'll be walking through a bit of a case study. So the impacts of the Texas winter storm Uri, the one that just happened in February of this year, on critical infrastructure, and a little bit more specifically on the water sector. So we'll start off with a bit of a sequence of events and a bit of a timeline. So it started off on the 10th of February. ERCOT, which is the kind of organizing utility for the Texas grid, the CEO warns the customers to conserve energy, and there's warnings of looming gas shortages. And this was following a winter weather advisory. As you know, in Texas, not a lot of that happens.
Carl, I don't think you're sharing the screen, sorry.
Oh, sorry, is something not clear? Okay, I had heard a little bit of feedback.
Ian, I don't know if you can see, but I can't see his, I can't see the screen.
Oh.
I believe that's because you're in presenter mode, so you may not be able to see it, but we'll just have a quick check.
Okay, just make sure we're on the right slide. There should be a timeline up on the screen with sequence of events as the title. Are we confirming that's correct?
No screen share is being shown. That's from one of the panelists.
Okay. All right. I'll go back there. All right. Let's give it a shot.
There we go.
Here.
There we go. Yep.
All right. My apologies. That's probably that is very much that is pretty much on me. All right. So we have the timeline. It makes it a little bit easy to visualize. So talked about the kind of warnings that we're heading out, and there was the winter storm advisory, and then we had the freezing rain coming 19 millimeters. And of course, in Texas, I don't think anyone has any winter tires, so massive pileups on the highway. A little bit later on the 14th of February, the White House a federal emergency declaration for Texas to come in and help them for the emergency. And on the same day, we have 20 centimeters of snowfall. So quite significant for a place like Texas. The following day, we're looking at some fossil fuel generators beginning to trip up and go offline. The ERCOT, which is again that entity that manages electricity in Texas, starts initiating some rolling outages to try to stabilize the grid, and then causes some water treatment plants to go offline. Again, on the 15th, bitterly cold temperatures, another 10 centimeters of snowfall, and in the following days, we're starting to see boil water advisory. Some infrastructure is getting damaged, like water pipes are starting to freeze up and burst. And like the 18th of February, another 28 centimeters of snow. So it's accumulating, and by the 19th of February, we're seeing 15 million people without access to clean water, so either through the boil water advisory or infrastructure damage. So quite dramatic sequence of events and pretty quick. To give you a quick breakdown of the Texas electricity production, this is how it looks like. 50% is natural gas, 20% coal, and 20% is wind and solar, and 10% nuclear. Just for context, Canada produces in a year more or less 630 or so terawatt hours. Texas is 429 terawatt hours. So it's comparable actually to the entire electricity production in Canada, and they have a population of close to 30 million, so that makes sense. And so some of the problems that we're seeing when all that hail and snow was going down was that the energy systems in Texas were not optimized for freezing weather conditions. They don't encounter that very often. Coal power plants shut down at freezing equipments. Wind turbines were just not designed to shed kind of all that hail and all that freezing rain. And solar panels were covered in snow. And when it kind of thawed and melted, equipment also flooded. So a really bad situation overall. Things for the natural gas system. So we saw that natural gas was 50% of the production capacity in Texas. Air intakes were frozen up, and antifreeze systems had to shut down and weren't functioning. So overall, the storm caused a loss of 4.9 million customers to lose power. And as the power was going down, the demand for heat was going up. People were trying to heat their homes, and that led to some malfunctions. And just a note here, a lot of people were saying, we're asking, why couldn't they just import energy from the other states? Well, Texas is a little bit of an oddity in that they are not necessarily, part of the Eastern grid or the Western grid. They are their own electrical entity, kind of like we have Quebec up here, but Quebec has a much more robust and large interconnections with the rest of North America. So they have very limited capacity to what they can import and export in Texas. What we also saw was some feedback loops happening. So the power plants were failing, and then they were not able to give power to the natural gas pipelines and pumping infrastructure, so they couldn't get their gas to function. So the feedback loop was going in full action there. Looking at some of the water sector impacts, households and multi-dwelling buildings experienced water shortages, damage, and boil water advisory. So we talked about 15 million people or so. We had pipes that burst due to flooding, and it became a very serious issue in larger buildings. Just to give you a bit of reference, I was looking this up. In Texas, you can bury a water pipe residential more or less 30 inches. And 18 inches if you have a pavement there. So it's not very deep compared to us. And I'm assuming that's not very resistant to frost compared to our standards here. Same thing in the insides of buildings too. They have, you don't have electricity to heat, and your natural gas isn't coming in, or you can't heat the building and your pipes are going to burst. So people were trying their best to manage that. And on top of that, you had some of the water treatment plants that were offline, either the no backup generation, or the backup generator didn't work in the conditions that they were in. So some of the other impacts that we saw, affecting the other critical infrastructure sectors was on other businesses, like in food. The boil water advisories caused bottled water shortages. And when you really think about it, even if there's a boil water advisory, if there's no power to turn on the stove and no gas to use it, how do you boil your water other than maybe the barbecue, right? Use of water and food sanitation and additives, so for food production, that was interrupted. Fresh water for irrigation, drinking, and livestock was also interrupted. In the health sector, that had some very big consequences. So, in hospitals, they use water not just for the day-to-day activities like for drinking and sanitation, but also for things like sterilization of equipment. So it's very important for them. They also saw some burst pipes for flooding, and there was overall unsanitary conditions. So here's a photo of one of the hospitals. They had to use kitty litter because they couldn't, get rid of human waste within the hospital. And it's extremely difficult to back up water in a hospital. It's it's a lot. Water is voluminous and heavy, so it's problematic to bring up, to the 15th floor or something like that if you can't pump it there. Other industries like ICT rely on water for component cooling, for evaporative cooling. So your data center can't get cool. They're going to be very problematic. And same thing for manufacturing. It's used very widely there. So it had multi-sector impacts, and it was cascading, starting from electricity to water to other sectors. So what went wrong overall with this was a couple of things. Owners and operators in Texas were expected to self-identify as critical infrastructure. And I'll say this from my experience doing assessments throughout Canada, this is not consistent from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, but in Texas, it seems to be something that existed. And many of the critical infrastructure owners and operators were missing from the list, including some of the natural gas companies. So they were not identified to be prioritized during this event. There was failure of backup systems. So Black Star generators were starting to fail too for the energy grid. And Black Star generator, just for reference, is the power generators that are used to reboot the grid if you have a total outage or a significant outage to the system. Due to running out of fuel, if they were like natural gas, or cold damage because the equipment was not designed to run in these kinds of conditions. And there was a lack of preparedness. Texas had experienced similar storms in '89 and 2011, and virtually none of the lessons learned from '89 or 2011 were implemented. So it's not like this hadn't really happened in the past. And generally speaking, there needs to be, at least in that jurisdiction, a look beyond hurricane preparedness and to think a little bit more about all hazards. So this should definitely start to be part of their regular thinking for emergencies. So with climate change, your emergencies will change, and this is a clear example here. So the team that did the analysis on this, we thought about a couple of lessons learned from this scenario, and some of them are, number one, the extreme weather events are increasing in severity and frequency. So it's going to have impacts on our infrastructure, things that are designed to operate within certain temperatures, certain climates. If we have a little bit, 4 or 5 days of local maximums or local minimums that are way out of range, that's going to be problematic to how our facilities operate. In the water sector, how is it going to impact the water that we get, the temperature coming in, the aeration, more qualitative things like that. Another thing to do to help these kinds of facilities would be for them to conduct risk assessments for climate change specifically, to understand 10, 15, 20, 50 years down the road, what kind of things are my facility going to be seeing? What kind of changes are we going to see to climate? How do I adapt? So that's another thing. Adaptation will certainly be necessary. We're going to see more of these high maximums and low minimums in terms of a variety of weather and climate. Another thing that we noticed in this case here for the Texas for the Texas storm, and we also see during our assessments, is do not assume that your organization is prioritized. It happens a lot that we're going to work within a city, and let's say a manufacturing plant will tell us, yep, they know the water treatment plant knows we're very important. They prioritize us. They take it for granted, and then a couple months later we work with the water treatment plant to do an assessment, and they're like, yeah, no, that program doesn't exist. We don't necessarily have a prioritization program. So sometimes a lot of people assume those things, and they're not necessarily there, and there's no sort of written plan or documentation that exists. So it leads to false expectations during emergency response. If possible in the region, have a prioritization plan. Think of those things ahead of time. It's important for an organization to know what assets are critical and develop an approach to prioritize and bridge the gap between the stakeholders at all levels. So it's an ongoing process. It's not something I think you do once and it's over. It continuously needs to be kept up to date. And finally, communicate and collaborate. So collaboration and creating a general awareness of local resources within the region. And when you do have those connections made, when you have an emergency, it's easier to give a phone call to the folks you might already be working with and know during the event state. So there you go. That's some of the, that's a quick overview of the Texas case. We mixed in some of our assessment information that we did there with through our program. But overall, it was very interesting to go through this and to kind of see how the cascading failures throughout the CI sector spread out. So thank you very much, and I'll turn back to Rob.
Hi, thanks, Carl. Rob may actually be having a tiny bit of trouble. He did just send me a message. His computer kicked him out. So, oh, there's Rob back now. We're going to pick him up in a second, but just remember, folks, you can submit questions to the Wove app as well as on here. And Carl, thank you. We're going to take questions at the end for yourself. And Rob, if you're ready, we'll go to you now. Okay, I think we're going to give Rob a minute. Just I know he was rebooting his computer, so we all know that takes a second. While Robert's just getting... We can hear you with a little difficulty, Robert. Just maybe try again here and we'll see. Okay, like anything, folks, sometimes things happen. So we're going to go back to Carl for a sec. And Carl, I noticed in your introduction, you had talked about doing quite a bit of assessments across Canada in the water sector. Can you tell us a tiny bit about that and kind of where you feel the water sector is really at in preparedness? I know we are in some areas a rather, young sector into certain aspects of our resilience. So just what have you seen from your experiences?
That's a good question, and it's extremely interesting. I'll say, number one, it will vary a lot from site to site. So from mega large city infrastructure to smaller facilities, you're going to see a lot of variance there in terms of how things are handled. It's one of the sectors where things like the security and the overall resilience are not necessarily standardized, say like with energy and utilities with NERC and the regulatory guidelines they have. So that I think plays a little bit into the variance that we see there. So I would say it varies from site to site, but on average, we collect a lot of data on these sites and we're able to compare them to North America. And I can say this pretty confidently. The security and resilience posture of water and wastewater treatment plants in Canada is very similar to the same in the US. It's on average very similar. And on average, we also find that the larger they are, the more they can, of course, invest in security and resilience measures. That's to kind of be expected.
Thank you, Carl. That's good to know from someone that has firsthand knowledge of across it, because often it's difficult to have conversations from utility to utility in an open forum certainly about our failures and sometimes our successes, particularly in the field of cyber and things like that. There's always a bit of an apprehension to truly give the story behind yours. But those are the type of things we do have to hear to build as a sector. So we're going to give Rob another shot here, and we'll see. I saw his presentation up, so there is some computer issues, so please bear with us, and we'll see. There we go.
Ian, can you hear me?
Perfect, Rob. You're loud and clear, and your presentation says water brief on slide 1, so you're good to go.
Okay, sorry about that. It just means we're going to have to go faster. So sorry, folks, my computer went for a shutdown as soon as I tried to speak. So I got a lot to cover. I'm going to see how much I can get through. So I'm just going to kick right into it. So, okay, first of all, who we are. So I think people know my area is responsible for ICS cybersecurity, cyber exercises, and CI cyber engagement. I'm going to save the details, but we do all this stuff. So what you're going to see here is an outreach of all the different work that we do. I want to start talking about the National Cyber Threat Assessment, which was released last year. I want to bring this up because it covers a couple of key points that I think are definitely applicable to the water sector. Again, this is all information that is available online. You can Google, if you just Google National Cyber Threat Assessment, you're going to find all this information. A couple of key points to take out here. Again, the number of cyber threat actors is rising. Just look at past recent events. You can see that we're starting to see an uptick in attacks against the critical infrastructure, namely in the U.S., but you know what affects the U.S. is certainly going to affect the Canadian side soon enough. These are an estimation that ransomware is, of course, going to be directed against Canadian organizations. It already is, and I'm going to go over an exercise we did where we simulated such an attack and what organizations can do. We're looking at cybercrime, certainly one of the biggest threats, but again, state-sponsored activity, namely from China, Russia, and Iran, is certainly on the rise and is going to be one of the biggest threats that we face as a nation, that pretty much any nation faces right now. Again, if you just look at the events in the Colonial Pipeline, you can see the capability to disrupt any national level of CI. Again, that wasn't specifically state-sponsored, but it did come from a foreign state or organization. State-sponsored actors are certainly going to continue to conduct commercial espionage against Canadian businesses, academia, and governments in order to steal IP and proprietary information. So we're going to see that again. We're seeing it right now, and we've certainly seen it in the past. And then we got to look at the impact of foreign influence campaigns. Look at the disinformation campaigns that have been conducted in the U.S. elections. That's a sign of the evolving landscape. We're certainly going to see more of that. So what I want to talk about now is, so I think by now we all know what ransomware is. So if you haven't seen messages like this, some of these are kind of dated, consider yourself lucky. So I know when I first put this slide together a couple of weeks ago, I just did a screen grab of some recent attacks in and around CI. IBM saying that ransomware is one of the top attack types we're already seeing here in Canada. But even if you look at some of the titles here, you can see that ransomware, you know, it's not just limited to organizations. You see them taking advantage of recent exploits, namely within the Exchange servers. You can see new malware being used to leverage the SolarWinds issues. You can see it affecting the universities. FBI is warning about attacks against the transportation sector. We don't have to look too far to see ransomware affecting the pipeline. We've even seen it affecting cities. There was a large-scale ransomware attack in New Brunswick not that long ago. It essentially took down an entire city's government infrastructure. And then we see going to the IP, I really like the Calgary example. The town of Dinsbury, an organization, came under a ransomware attack, and this was a day before they were going to bid on a large-scale event. I like this specific example because they said, you know, it cost us $100,000 to recover from the event, and for them that means they have to produce $1 million in revenue to make up for that event, and that's on top of their existing infrastructure. So again, ransomware is here to stay. Well, I guess somewhere about a month ago now, 2 months ago now, I guess May would be a month ago. Certainly, this was an eye-opening call to everyone. If you weren't talking about ransomware before Colonial, we're certainly talking about it after. Now, this initially was a lot of people were worried about the effects on the OT system. In essence, it was an attack against the IT infrastructure, specifically their billing capabilities, and they made that strategic decision to shut down the flow of oil for, I believe it was about a week there. But I mean, that's a classic example of where you can see the attacks against the IT infrastructure are certainly going to impact the OT side. Now, I think it's come out recently that the attack originated from a compromised username and password to access their VPN network. I think one of the lessons learned is that it was just a single username and password. There was no multi-factor authentication. But again, that weakness in the wire allowed an adversary to enter their organization and cause the damage that they did. So now the ransomware threat itself is certainly evolving. I was affected by ransomware years ago, and it went through and encrypted a bunch of stuff in my computer fine, and we certainly still see that. But the threat actors are advancing their trade. What they're doing now is they're going to go into an organization, they'll gain that foothold, and then they'll get that understanding, do that reconnaissance, understand how the system is laid out, and then specifically target the backups. So a big portion of ransomware prevention is having those backups in place. But what do you do if you don't have those backups protected, and your adversary gets in and then takes out those backups? Then you're certainly limited to options. So this is something nicknamed as big game hunting, but I like it because it's a sign of how the adversary are advancing their trade. So what we did back in March is we ran a exercise called Remote Resilience with that goal in mind, essentially to, and this was a joint initiative between ourselves, RCMP, Communications Security Establishment, naming the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, to run through, let's run through a ransomware example and explore some points about how organizations can help prevent and then help respond. So these are some of the overall objectives. Again, how some of the cybersecurity services offered by the Government of Canada, explore the impacts of ransomware, and then provide some good reference material. And there's a lot out there. I know when we were doing some of the preliminary work for it, actually, having worked in the government for a long time, I didn't realize how much preventative advice and guidance is out there. And this is what we see a lot. We've got all this good information to give to organizations, and people sometimes just don't know that this information is available for people to use. So we went through, I think it was a 2-hour exercise. We covered a lot of points. We shrunk that down into 6 key lessons, or top 6. I'm just going to go through each of these points individually to give you some of the high-level points. Again, this is probably the first time you're not hearing about ransomware. Maybe it's going to cover a few points you didn't consider. First of all, the federal government, we don't recommend the paying of ransomware. In the end, there are no guarantees that you're going to get those decryption keys back. I think I read a report recently that some of the decryption keys provided by the organization responsible for Colonial, it was somewhat effective in that, you can't just pay for it and then you get that blanket solution to your issues. There's no guarantee you're going to be able to decrypt all the information. Once you pay it, you kind of label yourself as a target for future attacks. And this, in the end, it rewards the criminal activity. It gives them the funds and the capability to advance their trade and make themselves better. Now, at the end of the day, paying of ransom is not necessarily illegal in Canada, but depending on who the money is paid to, a victim of cybercrime, by funding these adversaries, you don't really know who these organizations are. Yeah, they could be cyber criminals, but maybe they're going to take that money, maybe they're going to fund terrorist activities, and maybe that's going to result in physical harm to people or loss of life. I mean, that's the worst case scenario. What is the reality is you don't know where that money is going. So that's what we're trying to prevent. The next key lesson is, again, I mentioned it briefly at the very beginning, but the Government of Canada has multiple resources to assist stakeholders. I'm not going to go through all these. You can find all these, for the most part, available on the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity or on the public safety sites. Ian, I can forward you a lessons learned document we did, and this is going to contain all this information. But a couple of key ones here: National Threat Assessment I mentioned, CSE Top 10, Cyber Hygiene, Cyber Threat Toolbox, developing incident response plans, developing a joint IT/OT incident response plan, and Insider Risk. So these are just some of the many documents you can find that's going to help raise up your cybersecurity resiliency. Key lesson number 3. Prevention can be significantly less costly than recovery. And what we're looking at here is to have an all-of-organizational response before you become a victim, so that you can better reduce the impacts of ransomware. You obviously want to stop this at the front door, and it's going to involve a dual-pronged approach. So first, there's going to be the technical solution, and again, this can go into many different areas in both the IT and then the OT realm. But you're looking at intrusion detection systems, authentication, network segmentation, all the stuff that organizations should be doing to improve their cybersecurity posture. And at the same time, it's the program side. Remember, so if you look at organization, you pick any of the top attacks in the past number of years, it's normally somebody doing something they shouldn't have been doing, somebody falling victim to a targeted email or a phishing campaign. The way to improve that is to raise that user awareness. See something, say something. If somebody sees an email that they think is suspicious, report it. Don't just blindly click on that Excel file or follow that link. And that's going to involve having that training in place to make sure your staff and employees can recognize the threat and report it, and don't click on that link. And also have those instant response plans in place. And specifically for the water sector, you want to have an instant response plan that covers both the IT and the OT side, because you're going to have, albeit some common areas, you're certainly going to have different approaches to instant response in those two domains. The value reporting. So there's a lot of value to reporting this. I know a lot of people want to keep a close hold, but maybe those agencies such as the RCMP or the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity, maybe they can provide assistance. Maybe there's a known decryption key that they're going to have that they can send to organizations that they can use. You don't see a lot of that recently, but again, I remember years ago working in the Canadian Cyber Incident Response Center, we had instances of this affected by ransomware. We already had a solution for it, and we're looking at to track the proceeds of crime as well. Where is this money going? I mentioned this before, and is it being used to fund terrorist activity? It's going to help complete that chain of custody to find out where this money is coming from and where it's going, and also linking investigations. Maybe the ransomware attack is part of a larger event. Now, at the point of contact here is for the RCMP's National Cybercrime Coordination Center. This is where I would say, at the end of the day, ransomware is a crime. We certainly hope that people will report it to the RCMP or their local source of law enforcement, albeit provincial or municipal. At the same time, as I mentioned before, maybe the Canadian Center for Cybersecurity can have some advice and guidance that they can provide you as well, and different advice to help get out of your situation and to help build up those resources to have a better cybersecurity resiliency to prevent those situations from happening. So what we have here is a contact point. If you're not dialed in, you really should be. A lot of good information there. So I encourage people to send an email to contact@cyber.gc.ca and get set up with their information flows. Next key lesson, two of them here: resiliency planning, backup and verify. I mentioned this before. Our adversaries are targeting the backups or going into the organization. So if you do have those backups in place, make sure they're protected. A lot of people are moving to cloud backups as well. Just make sure you have that agreements with the service providers, with the providers of the storage areas, that there is adequate levels of prevention and your backups are protected. Again, you're going to want to make it's no good to have, well, it's still good, I guess, if you have 50% of your organization backed up, but you want to have those comprehensive backups. Think of what can I lose, and I would absolutely be hooped from a recovery point of view. You want to make sure you have those assets back up. And honestly, you really want to have a program in place that's going to cover all of your organization. I know it's hard and it's costly, but the cost to do it after is certainly going to be less than the cost of doing it before, in some areas anyway. And you want to test it. I can't tell you how when we were doing the assessment program, Carl could probably attest to this. You go in, do you have a BCP in place? Yeah, we certainly do. But we haven't tested it in a couple of years. When you look at it from a digital point of view, if you haven't tested or your backups in a couple of years, that's certainly a lifetime, especially with the amount of information that flows every day. So you're going to want to make sure you test those and make sure those continuity plans cover both the IT side and the OT side. Just because you have a backup plan in place for some doesn't mean that default applies to both areas of the infrastructure. And last but not least, plan to be effective, prepare to respond. And this is a threat we all face. We face it every day. You as members of critical infrastructure, especially something as critical as water, you need to take that proactive approach. As I mentioned before, combine those technical solutions with the program solutions. Exercises are always a good idea. I know we've tried to do a few with the water sector, and there are some upcoming from a national point of view. But if those exercises are out there, get involved or even look to do them within your own organizations. We're currently developing a virtual exercise tool we hope to release later this year, and that could certainly help you run those individual company level exercises and participate in larger exercises. And last but not least, the decision to pay ransomware is a comprehensive one. It's not just the IT department or the OT department saying, we're affected with ransomware. We definitely got to figure out how to pay for it. There's a lot of implications to it. There's legal implications. There's public awareness, media relations. There's the IT side, the OT side, many areas you want to consider. When you sit down to make that decision, it's a pros or cons. Do we pay it? Do we not? Do we have the money to pay it? Do we have the capability to return to normal operations? These are all things you need to be asking yourself. And again, going back to the exercises are a good time to put those ideas on the table to determine where some of the gaps in the wire are within your organization. So that takes us to the end of I'm going to hit you pretty hard and fast here. I'm just going to keep going based on that restart. So that takes us to the end of the lessons learned from the ransomware. We're going to, and again, you guys, well, we folks work in the water sector. I'm certainly sure you've heard of the Oldsmar incident. This was a number of months ago, but this was pretty much a wake-up call. When you look at it from a technical hacking, you can't see me doing air quotes, but from a hacking point of view, I don't think this qualifies as a detailed hack, but it certainly highlights the fact of the need to better secure outward systems. So as many people are probably aware, City of Oldsmar came under a hacking event where an individual accessed the organization through TeamView, and this was a remote connection capability that was left available for somebody to access. I think it was actually commissioned to be decommissioned 6 months prior to actually being accessed by the hackers. And if you're not aware of the event, the context was somebody logged in, increased the sodium hydroxide in the water, or attempted to do it, increased it from, I want to say, 100 to 11,000. Now, this is a good example of, the systems were in place to catch when this happened. An operator who was on duty and aware, seen the event, immediately took action to return the levels to normal. But it's a good example where, let's say, if some of those system checks didn't fail, or that person wasn't available and keen to recognize the potential threat, it's the introduction of 11,000, whatever this measurement is, of sodium hydroxide into the water, which could certainly have affected anyone that was provided water by the Oldsmar Water Organization. So, I mean, at the end of the day, I think it's a good example of not having a good understanding of asset inventory. What are the pieces of my puzzle, and do I have them secure to make sure the same thing cannot happen here, not just in a Canadian context, but in any organization that has the responsibility for the provision of safe drinking water. Again, we see this a lot. If I reflect back to the ICS Symposium series, asset management, asset inventory, understanding what was in your environment, it's a big gap in the water today. And I've seen it on assessments, running scans on organizations where we find a lot of different nodes on their system where we had no idea what those addresses were. So, if I was to say a lessons learned there, would be to understand your environment and make sure you're doing everything you can to protect the environment. Moving forward, well, something else we want to highlight here, or something else I want to talk about, is the Canadian Cybersecurity tool. This is something, so we released, well, I want to say last year now. What it is, initially we did this as part of the Government of Canada's response to COVID. And the idea, obviously, the health sector was being more targeted, and still are today. So we wanted a quick way to do an initial assessment of the health sector to find out what their cybersecurity resilience was. So we developed a virtual-based cybersecurity assessment tool. Kind of look at it as a gut check and then a baselining that you can use. Go in and run the tool, come back and do it again, and you can hopefully provide that level of cybersecurity awareness within your organization. I'll talk you through what the actual assessment is just a few seconds. So the idea is that you assemble your team, whoever you think is going to be available to answer the questions. Then you go through the assessment. Only takes between 30 to 60 minutes. You can really complete it on your own time. There is no time limits. If you do, you can do half it, save it, come back, finish it again. If you're a member of CI, we really encourage people to do it because we think it's a valuable tool. Again, I expect that everyone on this call is a member of the Canadian CI and that you work in the water sector, so you're all free to participate in the tool. If you want, send me an email. It's the longest email address ever. So Ian, I don't know if they want to contact you and connect them to me, my email, I'll put it up at the end. It's probably easier to remember than that thing there. So that's the tool. I'll give you a quick overview how it works. Essentially, once you send us that email and we validate you're a member of the Canadian Critical Infrastructure, This gets you access to the tool itself. It's divided into 3 parts. The organizational tombstone information, where you say this is who we are, where we're located, how many resources we have. You know what, I'm just going to go through the example because it explains all this. And there's a technical resilience and then a program resilience side. So as I mentioned, so this is the organizational information, what sector you belong to, what is your subsector, additional information about the workforce. Do you have a budget for cybersecurity? Then we're going to ask you a couple of questions on what kind of events are you seeing, what are you doing to resolve those events, and we use this to get a better understanding of what are the threats that we're facing from a CI community, with the idea that the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity will take this information and then develop these supporting products. So the overview, this is what the tool itself looks like once you get into the actual assessment, and this is just a snippet of what some of the information looks like. To go into a little more detail. So the technical resilience side, it's 15 questions, and it's all based on the baseline cybersecurity controls for small and medium businesses. A lot of good information in here. The way we broke down the assessment itself is we have themes such as the importance of network documentation, and then we have references to where you need to go to get more information, and then we have tailored questions. And this is what's going to be different in this assessment than maybe other assessments that you've done. Most assessments go, do you do this? And then the answer, yes, no, maybe so. We go, do you do this? And then we give you varying levels of responses. Yeah, we kind of do that, or yes, we really do that, and yeah, we're doing that 100%. So, and you can see that in the examples here where we go through the different levels of questions. So all this gets fed into our evaluation criteria, and it's going to spit back to you in a number-based assessment of how you did. And I'll show that in the report just after this slide. So that's the first part, technical assessment. The next is the program resilience. So it's all based on the NIST cybersecurity standards. We divided it into 6 domain groupings, and this is stuff people should be familiar with: asset control, configuration change management, vulnerability and incident management, all the things you should have in place if you have the cybersecurity program in place. Again, I expect a lot of people do, but these are some of the areas you certainly need to be covering. And then where it's going to break down each of those domains. And it's going to provide you, maybe you don't have a PhD in asset management, but we're going to give you that overview just to jog your memory of what we're looking for from the asset management and for all the domains as it goes. And again, we have the same approach to questions. Overall, you could say same kind of questions, specific question, and then those tailored responses to get you that level of granularity in doing a virtual assessment. In total, 40 questions is not correct. It's actually 38 questions. So doesn't take that long, like I say, between 30 and 60 minutes. You do all that, you get a report back within 5 business days. This is a good high-level report, as again we use the traffic light protocol. But it's going to, what it does, it gives you the comparative results, how you did and how you stacked up against the subsector. So where you are in the water sector, and then where you are in, say, the waste treatment side subsector. You're going to see everybody who's done it. You're going to see all your responses, and then where you stack up against the sector and the subsector. So let's say, for example, well, this is not the best one. I'll go on to the next one. So again, you're going to see 4 pages of, we'll call it the executive summary. You're going to get that overview, how you did on technical, and then you're going to get that assessment. So here they scored 68%, and that puts them at a level 4 maturity. For those of you who do assessments, we base this on a number of standards and developed our own in relation to the assessment methodology we had developed here. And this is probably a better example of the slide itself. Here you can see, say for question 2.2, that's their response to 3. And then when you look at the results, you can see that's certainly above industry standard and the sector and the overall participants. So if you look at this example, this is a fairly high scoring organization. It's easy to see where they have a pretty good approach to technical resiliency, and that's the real value here. And again, this is going to give you how many other people have filled out that within the subsector. We do the same thing for the program resilience, and here you can see let's see if I drew my boom. Here we go. Any non-applicable ones are not considered as part of the evaluation. And then here's a good example where they scored lower than the average, subsector average, and then the sector average. So you can see the gaps in the water. You can see the 4s where they're doing really good, and then you can see some of the lows where they're doing bad. This is where you're going to want to focus your results in. At the end of the day, this is a different result, but you're going to get your overall results and then how it stacks up against the sector, subsector, and everybody. So the idea is that you come in, you run this evaluation. You could theoretically come back a year from now. Maybe you scored 60 and you want to do better. You make some changes, you come back, and then you run the tool again, and hopefully you have a better score than you've done before. And that's the idea. It's always continuous improvement, right? And then you're going to get the suggested advice and guidance. Now, so we're going to list all the questions. Again, we provide all the information provided in the assessment, and then we're going to list all the themes and all the questions and give you all your answers, and we're going to give you tailored advice to help support that. You know, it's not going to be detailed, you need to do exactly this. It's going to be the overall advice and guidance to help you improve your cybersecurity resiliency. We're going to give you all the maturity levels 1 to 5. So maybe you're a level 3, you're developed, maybe you want to know what it takes to get to mature. You're going to have at least our definitions of what these maturity levels mean. And then you're going to have access to other resources and links. It's going to point to the additional assessment tools. And as I mentioned earlier in the slide show, additional places you can go to get more information. So that covers the CCST. I'm now going to keep rolling forward. I've got 15 minutes. I'm going to try and do this in 5 minutes. Here we go. So we can take 10 minutes of questions. I want to talk about an initiative that was undertaken by the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. Some of you were involved in this. Some of you may have received emails on it. The Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity was attempting to put together a better understanding of what the water sector looked like. There was a number of engagement discussions. There were some focused user groups. And honestly, it was some of the best discussions I've seen in a number of years. We've tried to get the pulse of what was happening from a cybersecurity point of view in the water sector for a while, and they were very successful at having those initial discussions. As part of that, Deloitte is conducting an assessment where they partner with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity to do self-assessment. If you haven't done it or you have received it, I encourage you to fill it out. They're going to use that information, send you back the results of your assessment, and then they're going to work with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity to help develop an overall overview of cybersecurity in the Canadian context. Now, we're still working with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity to find out what the turnaround on that information is. But again, the idea was to get a better understanding, and this is something that's been missing from the water sector for a while: a better understanding of some of your concerns that you're facing. Now, this is going to be followed up not with everybody, but with a couple of deep dives where they're going to have that 2-hour facilitated discussion where they're going to drill down even deeper. I believe a number of organizations have been invited. I want to say maybe half a dozen, maybe 8 to 10. Some have completed, some have not. We've got some larger organizations. If there are some small organizations out there, smaller municipalities that want to conduct this, I think there's a lot of value in having the view from the big folks and then the view from the smaller folks. So if you're interested in participating in this, send me an email. I'll get you connected with that organization. Way forward. Again, we're very much in the process of doing this assessment. We're working with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity. We're still figuring out, once we have all this information, what we're going to do with it, because we're still in the building stage. Again, we've got a big scope. When you look at the water sector itself, a lot of different areas of focus. It's not just one. It's a lot of different areas. Yeah, I think you all understand the importance of your sector. We can't do anything without water. We can't go to buildings. We can't occupy federal buildings without water being in those systems. So I think everyone here knows it's an essential resource. I really like this because this is some of the initial findings we had from those engagements. And these are some of the concerns that were highlighted across a number of those focus groups. How to connect the OT and IT system security. We're starting to see, the famous word of convergence, but we're seeing that a lot more. Traditional non-connected systems are now being wired into the IT side, and all the challenges and wonders that go with that. Other issues: how do we secure servers or machines that can't be patched? I know when we were working with the nuclear sector, they do a patch cycle of maybe once or twice a year. I know we've got similar problems within the water sector. There is a need for a cybersecurity framework, some type of standard for the water sector. I know we don't have that now. I'm pretty sure the U.S. has a number of approaches to this, and there's some really good advice and guidance there. From a public safety point of view and an ICS point of view, we're looking to build a better understanding of some of those standards that are available specifically in the U.S., or advice and guidance that's available here in Canada, with the idea to put all this place in an accessible place with in an accessible location on our portal so people can access. There's a big need to increase awareness of upper managers. On that note, we're putting together what are industrial control systems, what is operational technology. That's something public safety is hoping online in the fall of this year. It's a really good focused 1 hour session that attempts to explain the complex world of OT, differences between IT, what are industrial control systems, and we actually are going to highlight the water sector and the various stages of water treatment from an industrial control point of view. So once that's online, I'll certainly forward to this community. A common thing we see a lot, lacking staff, one person deep in water plants. We've seen this a lot. It's always that one person who does all the stuff. COVID was a good example of what happens if that one person is taken out. A lot of need for beginner level guidance, hands-on, not theoretical. Again, we're hoping to do some of that with the training that we provide here at Public Safety and some of the training we have planned. Very big need for basic cybersecurity best practices. Again, a lot of this advice and guidance is out there, is certainly applicable to the water sector. But again, Public Safety is looking to organize some of those best practices into additional guidance. Problems of remote connect and need regular calls. That's something we're hoping to do in the future, set up a regular call. What now? Again, these are just some of the ideas I put forward here today. Ian, I got one more slide. This is going to be 2 sessions coming up. Public Safety is hosting a Now You Know session where we're going to go over lessons learned in an IT/OT environment. This is coming up next week. If you're not involved in it, send me an email. I'll get you connected. And of course, our industrial control security symposiums that are now virtual. Our next one is coming up in October of this year. We're taking the summer off, but if you want to get involved, we encourage you to send us your applications for speakers. And Ian, that's all I had. I think that was a lot to get through, but hopefully I didn't hurt people's ears too much.
No, that was great, Rob. Thank you very much. Rob and Carl, thank you for presenting today. And yeah, that was it was quick, and there's a lot of information there, folks. And there's a lot of great tools that are available, particularly free tools, which is great. I mean, we're all suffering a bit from COVID and our budgets at utilities. So what we're going to do is we're going to make those presentations available. Then you can digest them a little slower at your own pace. And then when you see these opportunities for these tools, these assessment, these cybersecurity tools, you can reach out to Rob or Carl or whoever in their organization that's providing this. And we didn't have a lot of questions to the audience. Rob, what's the timeline on the Deloitte assessment?
So I believe the Deloitte. Yeah, I believe the Deloitte assessment, it's ongoing now. I think they're hoping to have it all wrapped up with the information made available at the end of July. And the Deloitte assessment is actually the start of I think it's a year-long program where they're picking 4 sectors, and I can't remember the 4 sectors right now, but they started with the water sector, and I think they're moving on to maybe food, safety, or transportation, one of that. So, but it's about a year process in total. I know they're hoping to finish with the water sector by the end of July.
Thanks, Rob. And I know in the water sector, and I'm part of this kind of group too, a lot of times we're very good at water and wastewater. That is our backbone. And the cybersecurity and the IT side are usually handled by others. And sometimes it's a total different area in a municipality. So often there's not the communications between the folks that know the IT and the folks that run the water. So the tools you've talked about, they really are great, great tools to bring together those minds. You mentioned forming the proper team before you fill out the survey, and that's important. And upper management should have a general understanding of cybersecurity, and it's a good opportunity to start that conversation, especially when you get the results. Carl, in your presentation, you mentioned that in Texas, I believe it was Carl, yes, in Texas, you mentioned that they kind of had these events a couple times and really didn't learn their lessons. And I think that's something that's inherent in the water industry is in any industry. You don't often talk about your failures and what really went wrong. So can you suggest any tools or any avenues where those water utilities interested could kind of find out about these cyber threats, and find out information on what's occurred in our industry? I know there is the gateway as one, the CI gateway, but perhaps you know some other tools you could provide for our audience.
Absolutely. So the way that we're going to be moving forward at Public Safety Canada, so we have the CI Gateway where we have a whole bunch of great resources there. Another one that I'd recommend is if you'd like an assessment, all things cyber, Rob Pitcher is your person for that. So he's gonna have quite a big suite of tools to do technical cyber assessments, cyber resilience assessment, and the CCST that he's shown to you. And on my side of the shop, I'll be doing all things physical security and general kind of operational resilience. So all hazards minus cyber. So we offer these services free of cost to Canadian critical infrastructure, and everyone here is in the water sector. So it's all available to you. And if it's of interest to you, you can reach out to us via email. They'll be within our presentations. I think those are some good starting points to gather a picture of where you stand on your physical security, cyber posture, and resilience overall.
Thanks, Carl.
Okay.
We'll go to Rob.
Yeah, so I think so. Ian, you mentioned a great point that we're doomed as a society to keep learning the same lessons learned over and over again. Maybe that's not exactly how you state it, but I want to take the other side of that as well, because in some of those conversations we had with the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity and some of those supporting organizations, and we would have a couple different municipalities or organizations on the line, and I found it really encouraging and interesting to see the different approaches that different water sector organizations took to having different levels of security within their domain. So to me, it seemed that there was everyone's doing it the same way. Everybody was doing it in the way that was based on the personalities or organizations that had set up those infrastructures. And I'm sure I'm talking to the choir, because I'm sure there's no two, I'd say maybe wastewater treatment plants that are set up the exact same way. So I think there's a real value in having those discussions, and here's what worked for my organization and here's what didn't work for my organization, so we can share that as a community. The biggest challenge I've faced, and you can certainly attest to this, is getting those, with all the different events we've done with the water sector, it's getting the right people in the room to get them that message. So I think what we need to do is as a community, and I'm certainly willing to help lead that, is even if we had a monthly or every 2 months, just to get the cyber folks together, throw a couple of topics on the agenda, go through some of those, here are some events we've seen, here's stuff we're seeing. Because my understanding is, as a sector, we're not sharing that information. And I think there's a lot of value there, because a lot of people are facing the same issues, but at the same time, a lot of people have creative ways to help defend their systems and to help put those cybersecurity measures in place. And it's a great community. All the people I've met are very passionate about this, are very passionate about the security of their systems. And I think that's a really important note.
Thanks, Rob. And I'm just hearing you talk, I'm just going to point out a couple of other opportunities. What's been happening is Public Safety Canada has been good enough to kind of be the host of CI engagements, critical infrastructure engagement meetings. We host these we might be down to every 2 months now, or every month. There's kind of two levels of meetings. There is the critical infrastructure team, which is more or less the leads from each sector, and we do meet every 6 months and then again annually. But there's also a broader group where, as Rob has mentioned, we discuss a lot of topics that are not only impact the water sector, but the other CI sectors. We also talk about our interdependencies. So that's another resource. I may be able to email out those dates and that information. And with the time coming short, I just want to point out one thing, and maybe Rob can just add on it, is the ICS opportunities, the industrial control systems. We did host one in partnership with Public Safety Canada in Durham, where it was a lot of staff from Toronto and Durham and York. And it truly is impactful on our industry. That is one area where, with the heavy use of SCADA and water and wastewater, we are a little susceptible to attacks. So Rob, could you just I'll give you a chance to pitch that one a little bit, or just say something about it?
Absolutely. So if you're not on our ICS distribution list, make sure you get on it. Send me an email. I'll connect you. As Ian talks about, this is the in-person stuff we used to do when you can do in-person stuff. We've been moving to make that all virtualized. So what we're doing is we're essentially setting up various lanes where people can sign on and exercise various cybersecurity incident response in the OT world. So we're hoping to have that online in the fall. We'll start advertising over the summer. But again, the best place to get all this information is on our industrial control system distribution list. Start coming to those symposiums. And if you've got a story to tell that you think is going to make the sector itself better, maybe there is that lesson learned that you have or a better way of doing, send us a talk, request to be on the agenda. We'll get you in front of people, because I think, again, what's good for the gander is probably good for the geese. The better we raise the resiliency of everyone, the better off we're going to be. So.
Okay, in fairness to our attendees who have other events to go to, I'd just like to thank personally Rob and Carl. As always, great job, and thanks for the partnership Public Safety Canada does with our sector. And I'd also like to thank Actual Media, the folks in the background who made this work. We had a couple glitches and they helped us work right through it. I would just like to encourage everybody. Part of conferences for me are the talk after the talk, or the socializing, where you really get some good stories and you make some good contacts. It's not in person, folks, but it still is possible with the app. So please take advantage, go meet the suppliers, go into breakout rooms, go into chat rooms, and truly explore. And also, please take advantage of the opportunities being provided by folks like Rob and Carl. And let's get our sector up to speed, and let's get our sector communicating and talking about these issues. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thanks, Ian. Thanks, folks.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Ian.